with Israel's sin now dealt with Achan's hidden sins exposed and condemned, and God's justice executed on him and his family, the people of Israel are ready again to go back to battle. This time, though, and you can read it in Joshua chapter 8, it's not a sort of walking around the city of Ai waiting for it to fall over. This time they use a great strategy of going in, faking a retreat, having an ambush set, and they destroy the city of Ai. And you start reading through the rest of Joshua, really chapters 9 all the way through about chapter 21. And it's this idea that God has given the land to the people, but they have to go out and they have to fight. God has given the victory. He's with them. He's fighting for them, but they have to go out and actually fight in the battles. And they win. They win wherever they go under Joshua's leadership. They win the land, and they start then to divide the land. That's basically what happens in the middle of Joshua. It's about conquest, and it's about dividing the land among the people. Some of the tribes of Israel get land actually on the other side of the Jordan, but most of the people of Israel, most of the tribes get their land right in the promised land. The Levites don't get any land. Instead, they are designated to serve in God's tent, in God's tabernacle. You say, well, what inheritance do they get? You can read about it. Their inheritance is God. They get to be in the presence of God and serve God in the tent. God and the priesthood are their inheritance. And so that's basically the middle of the book of Joshua. But when you get to the end of the book, there's a summary. The author kind of summarizes all that I just described. And so I want you to see that because it'll help you remember what's in the book of Joshua. So Joshua 21, look at verse 43. So Joshua 21, and then you can look at verse 43. This kind of summarizes the story of the center of Joshua. It says, "Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers." Remember, we come into Joshua like, what's unresolved? Well, here, this is starting to resolve one of those promises, right? Or fulfill one of those promises. God gave all the land to Israel that he swore to give to their fathers, and they did take possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side. This is a land of rest. Just as he had sworn to their fathers. And I love this. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them. For the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. Not one. God's a God who keeps his promises. All came to pass. God keeps his words. All of them. He keeps all that he promises. And then when we get to Joshua chapter 23, we get to the important last words of Joshua. That's something we saw throughout the Torah, right? Throughout the first 5 books of the Bible, that the last words of these key characters are really, really important. Well, you come to that in Joshua chapter 23. Now, we're going to read the whole chapter, though it would be worth reading on your own, especially if you're using that guide. I think you'll read this section. But Joshua chapter 23, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. Like chapter 23, verse 2, Joshua summoned all Israel, its elders, its heads, its judges, officers, said to them, "I'm now old, well advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. For it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. It says, behold, I've allotted to you as an inheritance for your tribes those nations that remain." Because they haven't, under Joshua, they haven't actually wiped out every single other person. They've won the land, though, and he's allotted the land to the tribes, but the tribes are going to have to go out and actually push out the rest of the people from the land. It's going to be their responsibility. He says in verse 5, "The Lord your God will push them back before you and drive them out of your sight." God's going to be with each tribe. He will be with you to push out the rest of the people, but you're going to have to fight and you're going to have to obey and get the rest of the people out. So verse 6, he says, "Therefore be very strong to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses." And you're like, well, That is exactly what God told Joshua to do at the beginning of the book of Joshua. And God has been with him and has done what he's promised. Now Joshua, at the end of his life, is passing this on to all the leaders, to all the tribes in Israel. You have to keep focused on the words of God. You have to keep obeying. Don't turn from it to the right or to the left. Down in verse 9. For the Lord is driven out before you great and strong nations. And as for you, no man has been able to stand before you to this day. One man of you puts to flight 1,000, since it's the Lord your God who fights for you just as he promised. And even that some of that language, that's what Moses promised in the blessings and the curses in Deuteronomy. One of you will put to flight thousands. 1,000. And that's what Josh is saying. This has been happening. God has been blessing because we've been obeying. And if you'll just keep obeying, there'll be blessing in this land. So verse 11, be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God, because God has never been about just trying to keep a list of rules. It's all to be driven out of great love for the Lord your God. And he warns them, if you turn your hearts away from the Lord, if you chase after other gods, verse 23:13, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out the nations until you perish off this land. Now verse 14, he says, now I'm about to go the way of all the earth. And you know in your hearts and your souls, all of you know it, you've experienced it, that not one word has failed. Of all the good things that the Lord your God has promised, all of it's come to pass. Not one of them has failed. But then he warns them again, but listen, if you don't keep believing, if you don't keep obeying and keep walking with God, God will turn away from doing good and he'll bring the curses on you. And you think this is just like what Moses said at the end of his life. And now Joshua is passing it on, saying, we've witnessed the blessings, and I'm warning you like Moses did of the curses if you don't keep obeying. And the curses would culminate in God thrusting you out of this good land of rest and blessing that he's given you. And now you come into the very last chapter of Joshua chapter 24. And we're going to look at the end, and I want you to think and see how you feel at the end of the book of Joshua. Joshua 24, verse 14. He says, now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness, and put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river. And apparently Joshua knows that the other gods, the gods they served in Egypt, the gods of the people in the land, are going to be a temptation. He says, put them all away. Like the first commandment, have no other gods before me. You need to love the Lord your God with all your heart. No competition for God. Verse 15, and if it's evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served or the gods of the Amorites in the land that you're now dwelling in. But he says, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And how the people are going to respond. 24:16, and then the people answered, far be it from us that we would forsake Yahweh to serve other gods, because it is Yahweh, our God, the Lord, who's brought us and our fathers up here. And he's given us this land. And so they say again in verse 18, therefore we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. So you think the people proclaim that they will serve Yahweh. And that, so you got to think back to this. Okay, this reminds me of when Moses reads the words of the covenant, of the law, back at Mount Sinai. And do you remember what the people say repeatedly? All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Everything he said, we will do. And Moses then takes some blood and he throws the blood or tosses the blood onto the people. And he says, this is the blood of the covenant. And do you know what they do within 40 days of that? Moses up on the mountain? They are worshiping the golden calf. And here you have at the end of the book of Joshua, Joshua's like, you got to choose whom you're going to serve. You're going to serve the other gods, you're going to serve Yahweh. And they say, repeatedly, far be it from us. We don't want anything to do with any other gods. We just want to serve Yahweh. We're his people. He's our God. We love God. And so what would you expect Joshua to say? You'd be like, wow, isn't that what you wanted, Joshua? Tell him, great job. But look at verse 19, 24:19. But Joshua said to the people, you aren't able to serve the Lord. For he's a holy God. He's a jealous God. He won't forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he'll turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good. So Joshua, he calls the people to serve the Lord, and they say, we will serve the Lord. And Joshua then says, like Moses did, you aren't able to serve the Lord. But the people say back to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. And then Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. We're going to do it. I think, wow, this is a really strange ending. And it's not quite the end. Look at 24:29. After these things, Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. They bury him. And look at how it ends. Joshua 24, verse 31. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and who had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. Now, when you leave the book, how do you feel? Like, what do you make out of these last words, this kind of strange encounter? Serve the Lord. We want to. You can't. Serve the Lord. What do you make out of that? And then what do you make out of that statement? Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, all the days of the people who had seen and who had known the work that the Lord did for Israel. What do you want to ask? What kind of question does it raise? I want to know, well, what happened after those people died? If they served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the people who outlived him who had seen the work of the Lord, the book of Joshua ends with a very ambiguous ending, because we want to know, well, what happened after those people died? Did they or didn't they keep serving the Lord? And then we think back to Moses and what he said. He said, God's going to take you into the land and he's going to bless you. But one day you're going to turn your hearts away from the Lord and God's going to bring his curses on you. And all of this makes us leave such an optimistic book like Joshua with a strange anxiety and actually lots of feelings of pessimism as we end the book of Joshua and are about to turn into the book of Judges.